Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast, This Week in America. Thank you for spending some time with us on the program today. Footsteps in the Dark by Carlo Armenise is a collection of 8 supernatural horror short stories with a Twilight Zone flavor that highlight the eternal struggle between good and evil brought on by the human condition and the lengths that we go to satisfy our desires. Written in an extremely engaging and intriguing storytelling style that will get and keep your attention, Carlo went to Northern Illinois University, majored in English and journalism. He's been writing for years at the same time, doing stand-up comedy, acting, musical theaters. Writing is his passion, and he's written short stories like Footsteps in the Dark, screenplays, Conversation with Death, and comedy sketches for television. Also the author of Sam Reiser, Private Investigator, The Case of the Blonde with the Bad Nose Job. The multi-talented Carlo Armenise with us on This Week in America. Carlo, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you.
Well, we want to talk about the Footsteps in the Dark, but we got to mention this Sam Reiser character at some point during the program as well. I'm fascinated by all the work that you've done here, including this series of short stories that you put together. Where did the idea for Footsteps in the Dark come from?
Well, I've been writing, as you said before, and as is true, I've been writing for a number of years. And I was always fascinated by Tales from the Crypt and Twilight Zone.
Oh, yes.
And these serial kinds of television shows. And I started to write, put together a series of stories that I was intending to get to them and see if they couldn't be produced for television. And in the meantime, what happened is, along those lines, I was writing the stories and saving them, and finally decided that I wanted to bring them out, get them written, and get people the chance to really see what the stories were all about, and also give them an understanding of my style as a writer. So that's kind of where it started, and then it ended up being the book that I put out, Footsteps in the Dark.
And by the way, the book's available the usual places, Amazon. You go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on to get information on Footsteps in the Dark, and Sam Reiser, a Private Investigator as well. Let's talk about the character development, because you've got great stories. You hook us in the beginning and keep us throughout the story, but I love the character development. Talk about that. That's sort of a trademark of your writing in developing like really fascinating, multi-layered characters. Talk about being able to do that.
Well, the idea was to write a story. There's a lot of stories out there, and there's a lot of television dramas and television sitcoms and series that present characters. But for me as a viewer and also as a writer, I'm not that drawn into them. I mean, there may be a couple that fascinate me, but for the most part, when I sat down to put these stories together, I wanted them to have a real life flavor to them. I wanted them to be a series of stories about what could be real people going through experiences in their lives, and a lot of the positioning of the book was really to talk about the process of good versus evil, and that it seems like most human beings, not all, but most, have that piece in their personality that forces them, or at least gives them the opportunity to be evil, and to start to realize that in many cases, the only way they're going to get the things they want in their life is if they can hurt somebody else to get them. And they're willing to go that far. So the stories really captured a number of central characters that were just that way. They were willing and put themselves in positions to go that extra step to try to take advantage of someone else to get the things that they wanted. And that's how I collected this group of characters. And I started out that way. I started out saying, this is a story about someone, and this is the things that they went through. These are the people they were willing to go against, and in some cases hurt, but this was the end that they got. That when it was all said and done, that evil didn't win out, that good did. And that was kind of the hook. and I wanted it to be prevalent throughout all the stories.
Well, it's interesting because it is. We're talking about the collection of short stories, Footsteps in the Dark, Stories of the Bizarre and Unusual. Our guest on the program is Carlo Armenise, and if you're Googling that, you'll spell it Armenise. Books are available at Amazon. Go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, link on there. I think maybe you just mentioned that that's sort of the common thread that runs through all of these. Is there a message that you want readers to take away, besides the enjoyment, the entertainment factor, a message that you hope they take away from in reading this compilation?
Well, again, I think the message really was that this was, even though they were most of them were supernatural in flavor, the idea was, the message was, these could be, and are in some cases, real people.
Yes.
And that they are going to, to give people an understanding of what it really means when someone takes that extra step to get the things that they wanted, and that when they finished reading this book, and hopefully as they continued reading through it, each one of those stories would have its own individual, presentation of a character and characters. So I wanted that message to get out that even though I was writing something that was fictional, it might just happen. It just might happen. And maybe it's in fact even happened to some people, where the supernatural kind of gets involved and colors the flavor of what they're going through in their own lives.
It's an excellent collection, Footsteps in the Dark, Stories of the Bizarre and Unusual. What kind of reaction have you been getting to this book so far? The reviews that I've read have all been incredibly favorable. What kind of reaction are you getting?
Well, that's been the reaction. It's funny. When I first wrote the book, obviously what writers do, I do. Can't speak for all writers. But the first thing you do is you kind of give it to some people you trust.
Yes.
And you say, hey, would you read this book and let me know what you think? And the reactions I started getting just from regular people that I trusted was pretty phenomenal. That people said, wow, these are great stories. I'll give you an example of something that got said by one of the people that read it at first. And the statement they made was, these are really great stories, but be careful, don't read them by yourself or at night, because you just might hear footsteps in the dark.
Yes.
And to me, that was really the piece of it that really told me that they were working. They all have twist endings. Each of the stories has a twist ending. So just because you see and think you know what's going to happen to these characters, at the end something completely different happens. So that was that group. And then as a writer, I went out and I pursued people to get reviews, professional reviewers, and all of those reviews came back great. This was for the most part, was almost a 5-star review from everybody I gave it to, which gave me additional confidence that this collection of stories really was, as I thought they were, really, really well developed and well written. And that's kind of been the situation. So there's, as you've mentioned, there's reviews on Amazon, there's reviews on Barnes and Noble, there's a review on selfpublishingreview.com, and every time I put them out, I got that back. Was that this was a really great collection.
Well, talk about the process of publishing a book. You mentioned the self-publishing. Talk about going into the process in your thoughts of publishing a book, because it's one thing to write it. It's another, isn't it, to get it published and then be able to promote it and to make it available to people.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting, that still continues to be an interesting process. Is self-publishing in and of itself is challenging.
Yes.
Because first of all, there's a lot of self-publishing companies out there that basically just self-publish, and the people that are self-publishing, they're just doing it for themselves. The self-publishing company takes your money, they put out the book, and for the most part, I'm pretty sure they don't even really look at the quality that much. If you're paying $3,000 or $4,000 to self-publish a book, they're really more interested that you can afford it. So they put the book out, and then it kind of just sits there. You don't get a lot of help in terms of the marketing, which turns out to be the most important thing about publishing, is just the marketing. And it's so difficult these days, as you know, and your listeners know, that to get a major publishing company to look at new writers and new material
Yes.
is almost impossible. So the only way you get your stuff out there is to be able to put it out and self-publish it. So it was a process, and I had to pick. I took a chance, and I picked a self-publisher for Footsteps in the Dark that I do a lot of research and read a lot of reviews and of these different publishing companies, and I took a chance with the first one, and they did a good job. They did a good job because you also have to design a cover. You also have to design the back, the back cover of the book as well. And what I'm finding out is the look of the book that really is critical. I mean, it's almost, I won't say it's more important than what's inside of it, but it's first glance. It's like an ad. If you look at it and you're fascinated by the way it looks, then you'll take a chance. So I had to learn all that too, which of course worked out pretty well with Footsteps in the Dark.
Yeah, it really did, and it's interesting the thought about the book cover, because I see so many books out there, and it's sort of like an afterthought. Okay, it's done. I guess I have to put something on the front of it for a book cover, but it's like a calling card, isn't it? It's sort of like your little elevator speech, trying to get people interested visually into what's in the book.
Yeah, and you kind of when you're doing this, you start looking at other book covers.
Yes.
You start looking at titles, and then you look at the book cover, and you kind of decide, does the book cover really speak to the material that's inside of it? Does it capture my attention? And is it something that I want to pursue? And so I spent a long time doing that, and then the rewriting and writing and putting it together. Footsteps in the Dark, I think, took me the better part of 9 months to really finally get to a point where I was happy with it and wanted it to be out in the marketplace. So it's not a quick process, which everyone should know, but it's a process. It's a labor of love, because this was the first book I put out. So to me, this was the beginning of my career as a writer to the public, where they could actually see my style, because the quality of the writing is really what captures you and continues to want you to read more things that I've written. And of course, Sam Reiser was the result of that. So it's kind of that way. You kind of spend every minute making sure every detail is exactly the way you want it.
And the book is Footsteps in the Dark, Stories of the Bizarre and Unusual. And I guess Footsteps in the Dark, that sort of says what you hope our reaction will be as we read this. That's how you want us to feel. That you mentioned, don't read it, turn off the lights and try to go to sleep at night, that one review said. That's what you want to get across to the reader, obviously.
Well, yeah, that was really the issue. I know how I felt when I wrote the stories. And I wanted a deeper message. Horror is an interesting genre. I mean, right now, many film companies are doing a lot in the horror genre. And to me, this was really combination. It was horror, but it was also that supernatural flavor. And I wanted it to be a situation where when you read it, it kept your attention throughout the entire story. I had a number of reviewers come back and say, well, I started the story, and in some cases, I had to put it down. I didn't want to, but I had to. But I always came back to it. And when I started the first one, I couldn't stop until I got to the end of the book. That was exactly what I wanted. I wanted you to want to move through to the next story. I wanted you to be enticed by the characters and the story itself, and then want to move through it so that you could read it. I've had two friends that read it 3 times. Because they said, well, I really enjoyed it so much that I had to read it again, and then I had to read it again. So that's the biggest compliment that I could get out of it at the end of the day, because that's how I feel when I read it.
Well,
I want to read it again.
Footsteps in the Dark, Stories of the Bizarre and Unusual, by our guest on the program, Carlo Armenise. The book is available at Amazon.com. You'll find it there. And you can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. You said something interesting. When you put a collection together, I'm often fascinated by how you go about that. It's not like, I got 8 or 9 stories around here, I think I'll put them all in a book and publish them. Because one story really builds on another, doesn't it? There's some logic, some architecture that goes into putting together a good collection like this.
Well, and the interesting thing about that, which is really important, is I also wanted it to be visual too, because when you're putting together a black and white book, there really isn't anything in there except the words that send it through. But what I did is I did a lot of research, and I went on and got photography that spoke to the feeling of the story before you read it. So each of the stories, as you go through them, has a piece of photography, a picture of something that really speaks to the essence of the story. so that in each of the 10, each of them basically has that story. So, I wanted it to be all the way around. I wanted the imagination of the reader to be there, that they could envision where the story took place. They could see the activities of the characters, and at the same time, they got this visual representation of what it would look like if you went to this place, and what it would be like, and so you could actually take it forward to really get a full feeling of the story, and then, of course, read the actual story itself.
The story is in Footsteps in the Dark, Stories of the Bizarre and Unusual. With us on the program, the author, Carlo Armenise. That's Armenise. Information, of course, at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. That led on to Sam Reiser, private investigator, the case of the blonde with the bad nose job. There's the stand-up comic part of Carlo coming through in the title, which I love. Talk about that, and I think Sam's going to be back in another book.
Yeah, so Sam Reiser is a character that I created years ago. First of all, I fell in love with the name,
yes.
Sam Reiser, and then I wanted to have this be a series of cases for this guy. So Blonde with a Bad Nose Job is the first, and now I'm working on case number 2 and case number 3. And the idea here was I wanted it to be a character that was professional, that was a real detective in how he solved things, but also had a quirky side to himself, that his vision and the things he thought and the things he said were quirky enough and interesting enough where you just you have to laugh, but at the same time, the case is serious, and he solves it in a professional way. And so that was a real fascinating process to bring Sam Reiser to life. And I thought and again, getting back to the title, the case of the blonde nose job has gotten a lot of reaction. People start laughing even when I tell them the title,
yes.
and they don't even get into the book. So that was important too. And each of the cases will have that same kind of hook to it.
I mentioned in the beginning that you've done so many different types of writing. Is there one that you prefer?
That's an interesting question, because when I first got into this business, people would tell me that, you have to stick to one genre. So
yes.
I'll use the Stephen King as an example. He got his name made by writing that style and writing the stories that he did, and he didn't venture out. You wouldn't think of Stephen King as comedy, even though there is some comedy in his stories. But it was difficult for me, because I had Sam Reiser that I wanted to work on, it was difficult just to stay focused on horror, supernatural. I want to be seen, and I want my work to be seen as just quality writing. If I put something out, whether it's horror and supernatural, I'm working on the second book for Footsteps in the Dark 2, which is just another collection of short stories. But here again, in this collection, there won't be as much about supernatural. It'll really be, real slice of life stuff. And then I've got Sam Reiser, and I want to move on. So it's difficult. It was difficult for me to just say, no, I'm only going to write this thing. I go kind of where the flow goes with me. If I'm feeling like I want to be comedic, then I'm going to write something like that. And if I feel like I want to be a little bit horrible, I can write some horror. And it's fascinating, to me to be able to do that.
Well, and you're not forcing something then. You're going sort of where your instinct is telling you to go, where your interests are telling you to go, rather than saying, okay, right, I've got to do a horror story now, whether I want to or not.
Well, and the interesting thing there, too, is I put Sam Reiser out, and then I went through the same review process. I went through some of the same reviewers that reviewed Footsteps in the Dark. And what was interesting was to get the feedback that's saying, wow, I read Footsteps in the Dark, I really liked it, but wow, I read Sam Reiser and I really liked that too. So it gave me a strong impression that the writing was really what it should be. I want something to be well written. I want characters to be developed, and whether it's comedic or it's horror or anything, I just want people to walk away saying it's a great story, as opposed to saying, well, I really liked him in horror, but I can't stand him in comedy. So, that was kind of my goal. And I think I've achieved that to a degree. Of course, the readers are the ones to make that decision. But, it just makes me more excited to continue other things. I'm working on a couple of other books now, too, that are dramas. So, I kind of go with the flow, and I just really like to be known as a writer that writes quality stuff.
Well, and you do. We're talking about the compilation, the short story collection that Carlo's put together, Footsteps in the Dark, Stories of the Bizarre and Unusual. Carlo Armenise, our guest on the program. That's Armenise. Books available as well as Sam Reiser you'll find at Amazon.com. You go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on to all the information on Carlo's book. Carlo, the time has gone by way too quickly. It's been fun having you on the program. Congratulations on the success of your writing career. Looking forward to having you back on the program. So much more it sounds like you've got coming down the pike, and we're looking forward to that. Thank you for being with us on the program.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It has been our pleasure talking about the new book, Footsteps in the Dark, Stories of the Bizarre and Unusual. The author, Carlo Armenise, has been our guest on the program. Information on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we're back on today's program after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.